What's up guys, Ben Milliken here for Mystery Tackle Box. You know, we are finally through the terrible cold long winter that was this year, and we've made it into the phase of the season that might be my favorite time to fish all season long, and that is the pre-spawn phase. And the reason I love it so much is you can catch a ton of big bass that are putting on that big feed bag. So in today's video, we're going to talk about those bass movements as they go from their cold winter haunts and where you can target them specifically bank fishing as they move up into the pre-spawn to put on that feed bag. You know, it's no secret bass make that big migration from the deep cold water in the winter up into the shallows when they make their way to spawn. But what happens in between there is one of the best feeding periods of the entire season, and my favorite time to get out and fish. That pre-spawn phase, when the water gets up into the 40s and into the 50s, those fish make a big movement. And my favorite place to target those fish is right here on a bank, just like I got behind me. We're about halfway back in a creek. We got deep, chunkier rock. You know, a lot of lakes around our home area have a lot of that man-made white granite rock. That stuff's okay, but if you can find the deepest, nasty, chunkiest rock about halfway back in the creeks, and especially the deeper, chunkier rock, that's where you're going to load up on those fish. So I've got a three-prong approach to targeting these fish whenever I'm doing a little bit of bank fishing or even out in my boat. The first thing I always want to do is check and see if there's a moving bait bite. And the bait I use to cover water and really put a lot of fish in the boat is this flat crankbait. This is a 6 cents flat 75 I got in my mystery tackle box, and to me this is the best crankbait for this perfect time of the season that you could possibly be throwing. This guy dives 5, 6, 7 feet deep, and so I just make a long cast parallel to that riprap and just slow wind it. Let this guy bounce around, deflect around. Even this bluegill color like this looks a lot like a crawfish in the water, and whether they think it's a shad, a crawdad, a bluegill, doesn't matter. The flat-sided crankbait is absolutely key to get more bites. You know, I like to throw this guy on a 7-foot medium graphite crankbait rod, 15-pound fluorocarbon, and a 6:3-to-1 gear ratio reel. Gotta get it down those rocks. Deflection is the name of the game to get big bites. Now, if for some reason those fish decide to be a little bit fussy that day, they don't want to go chase down that moving bait, my second part of my three-prong approach to catch those fish on those chunk rock banks in the spring, right here, the old football jig and craw trailer. Really simple retrieve here, guys. Just like we do when we fish it out deep, we're gonna pitch it up to those rocks and we're gonna pull it at about a 45-degree angle back to the boat. A lot of times, especially if you have a deeper riprap bank, that crankbait's not getting down to the sweet spot where those fish are. If you have 8, 10, 12 feet of water, drag this football jig out and it's one of the best baits you can possibly throw. You know, I like to throw this guy on my typical jig gear, 7.4 heavy rod, 17-pound fluorocarbon line, and a 7:1 gear ratio reel is absolutely deadly. Now, after you fish through an area with that crankbait, that jig, you've caught a couple really nice bass, there's always one more thing I like to do to come back through that area, and that's to throw a little finesse worm. You know, you can rig this little finesse bait a lot of different ways. I love it on a shaky head in the early spring time of the season. It seems like those fish are really bottom oriented, so that shaky head gets down on those rocks and I just pull it around, drag it. It's called a shaky head. You really don't need to shake it or hop it or do too much with it. As you can see in the water, this thing has enough action on its own, just pulling it around, that just dragging this guy slowly can mop up any fish left in those areas. Now, the gear I like to throw this on is always a spinning rod. I pick up a 6'9" medium action spinning rod. I spool that up with some braid, usually 20 or 10-pound braid, and of course a fluorocarbon leader. I like 8-pound fluorocarbon leader, little 1/8-ounce jig head. You don't want that jig head too heavy or it will get down, snag up in that riprap. So that's a perfect setup. And just make, once again, 45-degree angle casts to the bank, or if you're bank fishing, make a 45-degree angle out into the water and drag that guy back. You're gonna catch a lot of those fish that wouldn't touch that jig. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. Use those 3 different baits and approaches in the spring. Get out on some chunky, riprap, steeper banks as those fish start to move up, and you can have some of your best fishing of the entire season. Thanks a ton for watching, guys. Tight lines.